Hello everyone, I'm Samantha Jane Smith.
And I'm Jacob Keynes, and you are listening to the Classical Queer Podcast. Welcome back to the Classical Queer Podcast. Today we're very, very thrilled to be joined by Andrew Sords, violinist, who's joining us from Cleveland in the States. And we're very excited to listen to a few pieces. So welcome, Andrew. Hello.
Good morning.
We are very thrilled to have you. I don't think we've had a performing violinist in such a long time. It's funny that the people we end up chatting to is such a wide breadth of composers and writers and performers of all sorts and section players and soloists and things, but you're the first violinist in a long time.
Well, listen, violinists come armed with stories, so I'm sure there's no shortage of conversation topics today.
Fantastic. We're quite thrilled. So, as we usually do with these podcasts, can you just tell us a bit about your story? Like, you as a violinist, you as a person, where did you grow up, etc.?
Sure. I'm Andrew. I'm a Gemini. I like sushi, long walks on the beach. Yes, as you said, I'm a concert violinist, and I spend about half the year on the road touring, and I feel like the luckiest guy in the world. The gratitude to walk on stage and play these works by Brahms, Beethoven, Dvorak. You know, if you had told me I would have been doing this at 14, I would have laughed in your face. But I feel very, very humbled. And I understand, Jacob, that you're from Canada. I spend the year in Canada. I just returned from performance in Toronto, and there is so much going on up there north of the border that is enviable, I think. So let's get that off. Also, the maple syrup and the absinthe and the Canadian bacon, of course. Yes, so, when I'm on the road, I feel like I put this violinist cap, and then I come home and you see me out in the gardens with hydrangeas and the peonies and the horseshoe pit in the backyard.
Fantastic. And you grew up in Delaware, is that right?
Well, I was born in Delaware. My parents met at the University of Delaware, and then they moved to Cleveland shortly after I was born. And we lived down the street from the world famous Cleveland Orchestra. And my grandparents were longtime members of the chorus. And so my violin lessons were Thursday afternoons, and then my grandmother would pick me up and take me to the orchestra. So at the age of 8, 9, 10, I get to see these luminaries come across the stage: Vladimir Ashkenazy, Midori, Gilsham. And I knew that it was something very exciting that I was witnessing when, a sold-out hall welcomes an artist on stage. And for 30 minutes, this artist is the liaison between composer and audience. There's nothing quite like it.
And what a joy to grow up listening to one of the kind of major American pivot point orchestras. I mean, there's such an incredible orchestra, and especially I don't know your age, but like at that time, that they've been doing amazing things for many, many years. But I'm sure when you were a kid, they were at the height of, not that they're not at the height of what they do now, but like they were really performing some phenomenal works with some phenomenal people.
Mm-hmm. It really is the Rolls Royce of American orchestra. Whenever I go and step into the hallowed halls of Severance, I know that's something special. And they
growing
not
up, did you
say that, by
the way? Yeah, fair. Did you? I mean, growing up and going to especially that orchestra. Do you think that instilled the love of like the classics, the greats, the big masterworks?
So it's funny that you say that, because I would be sitting on pins and needles during the overture, waiting for the concerto. I would be in awe of the concerto, and then I would be dozing during the. But of course, when it comes to Schumann, Mendelssohn, Brahms, Shostakovich symphonies, there's nothing quite like it. And I remember my grandmother had the Dachnani collection of the 9 Beethoven Cleveland Orchestra, and she had a nicer sound system than my parents had. And so as a little boy, I put in one of the CDs, probably Beethoven 9, and I would crank the volume, and somebody would call her house, and she would say, "I know it sounds like there's a 100-piece orchestra in my house. It's just my grandson."
Oh dear. I mean, it's funny. I used to have one of these box sets from the Berlin Philharmonic when I was young, these big box sets, and exactly the same thing. I go to Beethoven's night, crank up the volume, and all the neighbours would start complaining, and I'd be there pretending to conduct and wave around and this kind of.
And
It's
how
kind of.
great as you listen to a kid that it affects you that way. I remember blasting the Tchaikovsky violin concerto in the coda at the end of the third movement. Got me so amped up, I was literally bouncing off the walls. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Now, of course, you know, you go to a Gaga concert or Beyonce concert, and it's that same kind of feverish pitch. But Evgeny Kissin came to Cleveland last year, and he achieved
Mm.
that feverish pitch. I've never heard an audience
Mm.
scream quite like they did for Mr. Kissin. And
Mm.
may we never forget that. May we never forget that.
I mean, there is something about maybe we'll go off a different tangent here, but there is something about particularly an orchestra and when you've got the live acoustic instruments playing and that for me, that just sounds so different and the dynamics of it I mean, I love other types of music, but it's the whole dynamical sort of interaction with this on stage that for me just is so emotional and so different, I think.
You know, I tell the orchestras when I play with them how fortunate we are to spend 30 minutes together playing some of the most tuneful music ever written. And I may not know their name, I may not know where they were born, or we might not have even exchanged words, but when you look across the stage and you have smiles back and forth, and you're sharing a melody with the French horn, you're sharing a melody with the cello section, and you're encouraging the violas, even though many conductors say never encourage the viola section. You know, then you really leave feeling the camaraderie, the friendship that you bring. Because I've gone to places in the world where I have no idea how to get by in whatever language speaking, but
Mm.
then you start playing and everybody's on the same page.
And it really is something for those people who have never been a practicing musician. It's something that is so almost impossible to explain how deep that connection happens and how fast it happens. That you really can uh, not speak the language and immediately have this instant rapport with people, and feel very deeply connected and feel very emotionally connected. It's the wildest experience if you've never experienced it as a musician, for sure.
Exactly.
Um,
Sorry,
Go
can I
on,
just
Sammy.
ask? I mean, one of the things, just go back to something you mentioned a bit earlier. You talked about spending so much of your life on the road and how much of a privilege, I think you said, or something like that, to be able to go and do this kind of thing. And I was looking at how much traveling you do. I mean, you know, you were saying, you know, I saw in your bio you played for 300 orchestras on 4 continents and all the solo tours and all this. I mean, do you ever feel like, oh, you know, really need to stop today. I need to go back and this, or do you always get this kick every time you go on stage?
I'll start with the latter part of your question first. I always get that kick when I go on stage. I can be jet lagged, I can be under the weather, I can have had bad sushi, and yet when you hit the stage, nothing else matters because you know folks have bought tickets, they've made dinner reservations, they've hired babysitters, they put on nice clothes, they're expecting an event, and you feel a lot of responsibility. That you know, whenever I play a recital, Sam, I tell the audience, I know that you have a choice what to do on Saturday night, and thank you for choosing to spend it here at a violin concert.
Mm.
The other part, the airports, the airplanes, the delays, the traffic, the luggage, etc. No, that's not great. But then again, how you know going to Australia as often as I have, it's a gift. It's this violin that has taken to some of these far-reaching places. So no, that never gets old for me. Even when I think to myself, I've been on the road a lot. I've played a lot of shows this week, and what's the alternative? The alternative
Mm.
is I could be behind the desk. I could be doing something.
I'm so envious of that. I mean, it's kind of really nice that you know, and also what Jacob said about this. For a non-musician, I mean, my musical talents are zero, as I keep telling people. To see, people at rehearsal or when you see videos of it, who go in there, like yourself, and you suddenly connect with this orchestra. I think, as Jacob said, is a feeling that I don't think I could never understand how it actually works, because it is, from an outside view, it's so complicated business. It's
Well,
it's
it's
you've got
it
all
really
these
is
people.
a bond. It really is a bond. Just like if you're one of 1,000 in the audience, you've experienced something magical with everybody else in that room. And when I go to universities or schools and I talk about the power of music, I don't know anybody who gets in the car and doesn't turn on. I don't know folks who clean their house without music or go to the gym without in their ear. It's a daily part of our lives. It's like brushing our teeth. It is like the sustenance we need. It really is something that can connect us. How many times have you gone to a wedding or a funeral, and the first thing you notice is the quality of the music? Is it somebody's great aunt singing Ave Maria, or is it a guitar virtuoso playing one of the sonatas as somebody walks? We all notice.
Yeah. And I think it's also one of those things we don't always see that with us. We don't always, because music is such a part of the lives. It's like in the film scores and this, it works at such a level that you don't always know you're hearing music. I know it sounds a bit weird, but it sets the scene and it does everything else behind it. And if you don't have it, the film's horrendous. But you don't always listen. I mean, it's kind of weird. It's there as a background all the time, which I think is lovely, really.
We have a few things to listen to, and I know Sammy and I were both really excited about your sources, because I live in new music world 95% of the time, 80% of the time, maybe not quite 95% of the time, but I have this deep love of all the masterworks. Of course, they're phenomenal, but I never get to talk about them, and I never get to play them, and I never get to conduct them as a conductor, just because of the nature of my career. But I know we were both really excited by the selections you sent in, because we haven't talked about Franck or Brahms in so long. We haven't talked about Shostakovich, and so maybe we'll start with the Franck, because it's such a wonderful, wonderful piece of music. And I think everybody has a history with it, who knows it, experiences it. I remember the first time I heard it live. But maybe you can tell us what it means to you, why you sent it in, why you wanted to play this one for us.
The Franck Sonata is a very endearing work for many reasons. One, it is the rare sonata that really has cycled. The first movement is as innocent as childhood. The second movement is stormy adolescence or young adulthood. The third movement is looking back on everything that one has experienced. And the fourth movement is wherever it is we go after we depart this mortal life. And Franck got it exactly right. I mean, the 4 bars, the piano introduction at the beginning, it's like the 4 signs of the cross. And it was a wedding gift for the famed Belgian violinist Eugene Izai, who actually delayed his wedding by a few hours so that he could practice with the pianist and premiere it at the wedding. So it was not Bridezilla, it was Groomzilla. And I've never gotten sick of this piece. First of all, it's a piano concerto, so it's very important that you have the right cohort on stage with you. I've got a 2-pound box of wood with 4 steel strings, and the pianist has 88 keys, 9-foot-long instrument. And so, they can overpower you, they can leave you in the dust. So it really is quite the partnership. And it's a long piece. I think it's about 30 minutes or so. And it takes a lot of endurance. And every time I begin, I think, it's like the start of a race. How do I pace myself? And then you get to the third movement and you hear the intervals starting to expand, and you hear the tune starting to look backwards, and you think, this is the only place in the world I want to be right now.
Do you remember the first person you heard play it?
Oh yeah, Suzanne Sophie Mutter.
I mean, what a phenomenal one to play it. That's great.
Yes. And I thought that the kaleidoscopic colors that she had, and the rubato that she had, the fact that she could stretch, pull, and elongate, and speed up and slow down, and it all worked. It wasn't a drunken sailor singing along. It was a profound intellectual, yet there was that George Zell expression. I think she was thinking with her heart and feeling with her brain. Those coming together, yes, I've never forgotten it.
Let me just, seeing you mentioned that, I mean, when you play, do you think I mean, obviously there's a lot of brain power involved in this. I don't want to make it sound like there isn't, but does the heart kind of take over when you're playing and you just go along with it and you just feel it and go? Is that how it works with you?
That's a good question. Sometimes the coffee takes over. Sometimes the mundane tasks of the day take over. But it really is the fact that you talk about the brain power. It's an athletic event. It's your fingers going where you want them to go. It's the bow speed and weight proportion to changing the bows and how fast the bow is moving and the sound production. There's a physics element to it. There's an athletic element to it. And then at the very end, there's the connection part. Everyone likes to say to me, "Oh my gosh, the violin sings," and "Oh my gosh, have you heard that cello sing?" Well, yes, these string instruments duplicate the voice, but can the instrument actually? And a really great orator, somebody like a Barack Obama or somebody that can leave a legendary message. That's what you want. You really want to be able to convey something, and it's not always the bombast and the fortissimos. Sometimes it's the whisper, and how many people you know that can be very powerful. And when they're speaking at the top of their voice and they're getting animated. But I think about my grandmother, who in the sotto voce could command a room.
Yes. I mean, I think we've kind of talked about this before, I think, Jacob, where, it's fine having the very loud and the very bombastic type of stuff, but you have to have this other part with it as well. You can't shout all the time. It
It's very
just
interesting
sounds
to
awful.
explore the softer dynamics. It's very interesting to see, can I get the audience on the edge of their seat? Can I get them looking forward? And of course, it depends on the audience interaction, because sometimes, you feel like they're far from you and are they getting it? Are they on the same page as me? Am I translating it the way I need to be? And then other times you feel like you're wrong. So it's funny because you can't replicate it. I can do the same program 3 nights in a row with the same number of people, and you have no idea the chemistry. It's like, showing up for the first date. You've seen the information, you've seen the pictures, but will you have that chemistry in person?
And that is the beautiful thing about the ephemerality of performance, and the way it goes is entirely dependent on every collective mood that's in the room. And it's the beautiful thing is, some of my most favorite performances, either as an audience member or as a performer, are ones that the mood is not right. Like there is something really strange and weird about the whole thing, and it's kind of a fantastic thing. I mean, it's not necessarily the nicest feeling as a performer, but it's interesting to analyze. It's interesting to
And there's never a
have
dull
that
moment.
feeling.
There is never a
Never.
moment in this industry. A string can break, the sheet music can be out of order, the piano string can break, there could be a medical event in the audience. Everything I just listed has happened. Of course, there's the distraction of cell phones and audience noise, but you never know. You never know when you step on stage what is going to happen. My colleagues and I love to say there is never a dull moment in this industry.
I was at a small concert some years ago, and a cell phone went off, and the guy who was playing the piano just stopped, and he went, "It's okay, take your time, just we'll wait for you." And then the guy was like, "Yeah," and he went through the thing, and he said, "Okay, let's start again, let's go again." And he went through the whole thing again. It was really good. He was very good. He didn't get angry. He just went, let's do it again. So which I thought was great. We ought to listen to a piece of music though, because our listeners will now be saying, "We want to hear this, Frank." So yeah, let's listen to it, and then we can talk some more.
what a fantastic performance. And I love that you can hear in your performance everything that you talked about, the moods and the narrative of that sonata, that it does really take you through um, quite a like connected story, which is so, like you say, surprising for sonatas, and especially um, from that era. Like it's so interesting that this one actually does take you through the full story. Um, what are you thinking about when you play it? Are you thinking about how to prep the next bit? How are you working through that story for the audience?
Well, Jacob, I might be thinking about the meal I'm going to have after the concert, the martini. You know, will it be gin? Will it be a lemon drop? Do they have calamari backstage? No, that might be part of it. But it really is. I mean, if I've performed it 150 times or whatever, it's a combination of every time that I've stepped on stage with it, from the very first time, which I can remember back in 2006, to maybe the week before, maybe the night before. And without those experiences, we are not the same person we were 17 years ago. We're not the same person we were last week. A lot has happened in our lives. Personal, a lot has happened with the politics and worldviews, and we can go on and on with that. And as artists, I don't know if we need to shout from the stage our views on every last thing, but as artists, we do need to connect level. And that is why when major events happen, if there's a national anthem performed, if there is a hymn, if there is a singer uniting everybody, um, it, are put on this earth to make the world a little bit more beautiful. I am not so naive to think that the world is going to come crashing to a halt on its axis every time a great performance happens. The Franc was written in the 1880s, so years ago, and the performance, just one blip, just half an hour in history. So when you put it into perspective, it's a small deal. But to the audience members who come out that evening, it could be a very big. I remember there was one I gave Connecticut, and on the program was the Beethoven Kreutzer Sonata, and
Mm.
really nicely dressed came up after the concert, and she said, "Oh, I came out today because Beethoven." I said, "Oh, it's wonderful, thank you." She said it really was cathartic for the. Thank you. And she said, my son lost his life in the armed forces overseas, and this is the first time in months I can leave the house.
Hmm.
And it paralyzes you. And then you're on a plane with your pianist hours later, and you think it's so much bigger than the scales and the notes and the rehearsals and everything that we go. And at intermission, we think, oh my gosh, more. We're kidding, of course. We love the pieces on the program. But for this particular individual, it was the first time they left the months because of a Beethoven sonata. If that doesn't show somebody the power of music, I don't know what other proof we need.
Yeah, great story. Yeah. You said that you played this piece, I think you said 17 years ago, the first time you played it. I mean, how do you think you've changed as a musician in that time? I mean,
Oh
if
my
you could
goodness.
look back at yourself and go, "Oof," is it, are you really, I mean, is it changed so much that you can't compare, or?
Well, I start on the same note and I finish on the same note, and it's more or
And
less,
they're all in the right order as well, right? Yeah.
yes, it's in the right order. But of course, we aren't the same person. And I think, wasn't there a psychologist that said every 7 to 10 years we are totally different people, and sometimes we grow together and sometimes folks grow apart. Uh, I was a kid. I didn't know anything about
Hmm.
anything. I didn't know what this whole career entailed. I thought that if you look cute and sounding good, that was all you needed. Um, and then you get all these performances under your belt, and you have these mentors, that have been doing it longer than live. Um, my pianists are typically at least a generation older than, and they've been playing these sonatas
Hmm.
all these years. Um, and it's fascinating to learn from folks who've done it. Now, of course, they're welcoming, I hope, my views on the piece, but I'm old-fashioned. I think, when you listen to your elders, you learn something. And I'm not calling them elderly for anyone listening.
No, that's fine. That's good. Just be careful. Yes, I thought it was funny when you said you listened to Ashkenazi. You saw Ashkenazi at 8, and I was like, I can't tell you how old I was when I saw Ashkenazi. So, yeah. So maybe we ought to move on to another piece. Shall we talk about the Brahms? Because this is one of my favorite pieces. So favorite piece for violin. So tell us about the Brahms. It's one of his Hungarian dances.
So Mr. Brahms wrote 21 Hungarian dances, and the publisher, Simrock, had wanted encore type bonbon vignettes, and he responded with tunes that a century later maybe Madonna or Prince would have been able to go into the recording studio with. They never get old. This fascination that Brahms and Bartok and others had with the Eastern European theme, the music of the Roma, the music of Hungarian villages that they heard, the recognizable intervals with the augmented seconds, what we might refer to as gypsy music, the Spanish flair of Sarasate, the Romanian flair of Enescu. And I've probably performed 4 or 5 of the dances. Not all of them are my favorite, but of course 1, 5, 6, 7, and 5 might be the most recognizable. And sometimes it's fun after you have a steak and potatoes to have some chocolate, to have some whipped cream. And this is what it is. It really provides something for the audience that is not a course. And I believe the performance you're going to play is from an encore that I did, unannounced. And it's really, for me, an encore is a gift to the audience, to the presenters, for everyone who decided to come out to the hall. Here's a little token of our appreciation.
I think it's that piece that everybody knows. So, I mean, whereas you may go to a concert and say, "Hey, I'm listening to some nice violin music this evening," you may not know as an attendee every single piece, but you probably know the Hungarian dance, and as you say, it gets everybody moving a bit, it's kind of, and the change of pace in it and everything else, and it's just one of those pieces that sticks with you. I think, at least certainly with me, it's been a lifelong companion of always listening to it when you want to be cheered up and get a bit of blood flowing, as it were.
Well, let's have a listen. So the funny thing for me, like you say, it's a little bit of dessert, it's a little bit of chocolate. Um, it's always amazing to me, those pieces that are dessert are a little bit of chocolate, but it doesn't really matter how many times you play them. They're always kind of fun and they're always kind of exciting. And I think one of the things, and I think you even said it, is like it's fun to watch the audience enjoy it. Like it's fun, even if you've played it a million times, for the audience to go, "Oh, I love the Hungry." Like that's just
It's
like
the
a
moments
fun
you get
moment.
away with, when you stretch the tempi and when you have little dramatic pauses. Is the
Uh-huh.
audience right there with you? And in these Hungarian dances, you have these moments where you see grandmas out in the audience doing a little shimmy, you see kids having a laugh, and that's the point. That's the point. Another popular encore that I do is John theme list, and it
Mm.
Oh
never,
yeah.
ever, ever gets old. And we can call it Hollywood, which it is, and we can call it one of the most recognizable tunes in movie history, which it is. But it's also very evocative. It you know just like Sam was saying earlier, if you watch Schindler's List with on, it would not have impact even with the material that's in the movie. It would not have the same impact without the Boston and Itzhak Perlman
Mm. Yes.
providing the soundtrack.
Yeah, true enough. I mean, I am such a believer, and it doesn't matter where it comes from. I mean, Hollywood. There's some certainly extremely valuable cinematic movie music that is beautiful. I mean, I'm thinking of the Joe Hisaishi music for all of the Miyazaki films that is on par with any of the orchestral greats. Just beautifully written, well constructed, and certainly the John Williams stuff. I mean, John Williams is John Williams, but it's not that he can't write a beautiful melody. He can. It's beautiful.
If people knock John Williams, I say to them, "How many scores can you sing of John Williams right now?" I bet you could sing 10.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
a guy not as well known, but it's Horner, soundtrack
Yes. James Horner.
Titanic,
Yeah.
the soundtrack to The Mask of Zorro. You see these movies, and every time I've seen Titanic or The Mask of Zorro on TV, it is a powerful score, and he gets it exactly right.
Yeah. And you go back through, the say the great days of Hollywood, back into the, before you lot were born, the 1970s and 60s and 50s, and all the great Hollywood, all the posers of that time as well, and the music you get from that, Theme to the Big Country, or all these kinds of things. It's and it's accessible for people, I think, because they hear it in the movies, and it gets people into classical music. It gets them into it. They hear that, and then they go, "Oh, you know what? I could actually go to a concert and hear those things." And I think that's
Well,
it's kind of the tag. So it's nice.
it's very important for classical to be represented. How many times have we seen Bugs Bunny or animated
Mm.
cartoons featuring symphonic literature? Um, I think back to Sesame Street having not just Lerner Sonnenberg and Perlman on. I will never forget the episode that Perlman did where the lesson was some things that are for some are tough for others. And this little girl bounds on stage and plays violin poorly. And Mr. Perlman struggles on stage with disability and plays violin beautifully. And it really is a powerful lesson. Everybody go out on and check out that clip, and it
Yeah.
for the kids that it's reaching in the living room, they're going to be impacted. When I go to schools and I play for elementary school age kids, which is one of my favorite age groups to play
Mm.
for because they're wide eyed, their excitement, they really get into it, and they ask questions that adults would be too nervous to ask. Mr. Andrew, why do you hold the violin in the left hand and not the right? Mr. Andrew, why do you move when you play? Whatever it is, and it makes think out of the mouths of babes. But
Mm.
I tell these kids, it doesn't matter if you're a violinist or pianist or conductor when you grow up, but it matters that you are one that appreciates culture.
Mm.
I'm again not so naive to think that everybody has to like Rachmaninoff or Shostakovich or Franck. They don't. We don't all have to like country
They don't.
or
They
rap
don't.
or
Oh,
jazz, but being impacted by an emotional thread or a journey, well, that's just humanity.
yeah. It is interesting when you start. You say that people don't have to be impacted by that, but actually, when they listen to it, I think they do become impacted by it. I think it's actually getting them to listen. that is the key thing, because when they actually hear something, then they go, oh, I didn't know, and then you see, all the modern day musicians picking bits from classical music, and they go, that's a great tune. Yeah, well, actually, that was Beethoven who wrote that, or
And if
Mozart,
it
or
makes
something.
somebody think, that's half the battle. I'm thinking back to a performance I had this spring where a Cacciatorian trio was on the program, and one audience member came up and said, "Oh, I did not care for the Cacciatorian." I said, "I'm really not offended. I didn't write it."
Yes. Well, we had somebody on one of our first podcasts we did, and somebody there said, I don't really care what people think as long as they think. It doesn't matter if they could hate this piece of music, they could love this piece of music, but as long as they've thought about it and actually listened to it, then that's the important thing. It's actually doing that. That's the important bit you need to do. So yeah.
The last piece that we have to listen to, I don't think I actually don't think we've listened to any Shostakovich at all on the podcast, and I think we're now almost 2 years into doing the podcast. We've never listened to Shostakovich, so we're high time to listen to some Shostakovich. But I have a deep love for Shostakovich. Maybe where Sammy, you have a deep love for the Brahms. I love Shostakovich, and I remember the first few Shostakoviches I heard. And I remember being an undergrad and like writing a paper on Shostakovich because I was just so excited to talk about his music and talk about that really beautiful era of Russian music that really is so fascinating and impassioned and incredibly complexly written. And it's fantastic to hear this one. So tell us about this little piece that we're going to hear. It's only about 2 minutes long.
I think if there was ever a time to play Shostakovich, the time is now. I know I mentioned earlier that we can't scream and shout from every stage about the geopolitics of various regions around the world, but we're talking about a composer who had coded messages, who was vehemently anti-fascist, who had the KGB knocking on his door, who had the leader of the nation censoring him. And for a number of reasons, we can't censor art. It is somebody's choice. If you don't like it, change the channel. If you don't like the book, put it down. But we can't censor art. And so Shostakovich, for me, along with somebody as powerful as Beethoven, who, of course, was very aware and following Napoleon and the bombings in Vienna, etc. When I heard that orchestras were not programming Shostakovich following invasion this year, I was horrified. I thought this is absolutely the time to do this because he was anti-Kremlin.
Yeah.
And if there was ever a time to play those messages and his defiance, now is the time. So I've always liked Shostakovich for the. I've always particularly enjoyed this piano trio and odd number symphonies and the violin concerto, the cello concerto, his preludes, the piano and trumpet concerto. But I think that this is a very relevant musical now.
It always amazed me how he actually survived. I know that sounds, but I mean, he managed to somehow negotiate purges and everything, and while still creating fantastic music, and also, as you say, sending these coded messages about the Stalin or whoever it was at the time, which they didn't even realize. And I remember reading, I think which symphony it was of his, but apparently Stalin loved it, and so did the people, because the people realized it was anti-Stalin and Stalin thought it was pro-him. And I think that just goes to show how clever a musician he was.
His life reads like a John Grisham novel. You can't write this. I mean, we're talking about Hollywood. His life was Hollywood. And you're right, the fact that he survived into the 80s.
Yeah. Incredible. Now, let me ask you about piano trio, because this has always fascinated me a little bit. Because I love listening to piano. Sorry?
one of
What
my
is it?
favorite.
Okay, good. So, I mean, how does a piano? I mean, in a piano trio, you've got two other people with you, and you're very specifically three of you playing quite a complicated piece, probably. So, how how's the dynamic of that? I mean, in an orchestra, you've got obviously the conductor who's conducting, and then you're as the soloist if you're there as a soloist. If you're playing an individual piece, you're in charge. How does it work in the trio? Because I have no idea how you negotiate the responsibility. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but how it works.
Good question, Sam. Yes, in an orchestra, when the conductor is right, they're right. The conductor is wrong, they're right. There's a hierarchy to it. And you've got the conductor, you've got the concertmaster, you've got the principal players, and the soloist is sort of an honored guest. They might be rolling out a seat for you at the dinner table, but it's still their house. And the second people forget that, they will not get invited back. Now, the piano trio is a little bit different. There really is no hierarchy unless it's one of the piano trios where the pianist has a concerto part. I think of the Mendelssohn trios, maybe the Tchaikovsky trio, where it really is the level of difficulty is much higher. But for me, this is one of the very, very greatest of trio. And you think about the composers who were very taken with this combination: Mendelssohn, Brahms, Beethoven, Mozart, Dvorak, Shostakovich, Tchaikovsky, the early Rachmaninoff trios. And it can almost sound symphonic scope. You've got the high melody of the violin, you've got the cello providing some resonance down there, and you've got the piano filling in everything else. And in my 20s, I was perfectly content to go out and play recitals and concertos. And in my 30s, I try to plan as much chamber music as I can because, first of all, you're not practicing on your own. You're practicing with friends and colleagues that you learn from and then hanging out with them after. But there's also the nerves for me. I don't really get nervous for a piano trio performance because you're out there with friends. You share the attention, you share the spotlight, you share the music. It's much different. The scariest form is unaccompanied. It's just you. It's just the Bach or Paganini or Izai or whatever you're playing. But with the trio literature, my goodness. And it's something like the Shostakovich you're about to hear. It really is a headbanger. You feel like a rock star. You can dig in. If you don't dig into the instrument, you're doing something wrong because you can't be tame. This is not a piece that belongs in a glass box exam. You really have to live it on stage.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. That's such a tenet of mine that these pieces are not any piece of music is not supposed to be put in a glass box and never touched, and we can revere them, but they're meant to be played. They're meant to be dug into, enjoyed, and really experienced both as a player and as an audience member. And I think Shostakovich is such a great example of that. It's such emotional and exciting music that it begs to be dug into. It really doesn't work if you don't dig
And
into
it's
it.
got this macabre element. Third movement sounds like a Kaddish from a synagogue ceremony. The final movement, the concentration camp in Siberia, where the prisoners are forced to dance over the grave of their loved ones. I mean, it's macabre. And the anti-government. Again, this is why we program this man. Now, I don't necessarily want to hear all Shostakovich on the program all the time. That would be depressing. We're not going to see a Susan Sarandon tragedy marathon on TV with a box of Kleenex all day long. No. You need something uplifting too. But this trio is absolutely a desert island.
And it's funny you mentioned both of this sort of macabre feeling for Shostakovich, because I always feel that even in Shostakovich's lightest moments, if he has lighter moments, there's always this sense that you could end up somewhere quite dark very, very quickly, and the sudden change. And I guess this is again, what we've seen geopolitically is that we're all going along and it's nice and sunny, and then 20 minutes later it's that we're in the darkness again.
However good we think we have it, and we do. we absolutely, the three of us live in first world nation. We have to be cognizant of those that live in fear and that cannot speak out. And I think about in America, which is a beautiful country, maybe a flawed in some ways, but a beautiful country, that we can speak out and have these conversations without fear of execution, imprisonment, or death.
Well, let's listen to the Shostakovich, I think, and then we'll maybe chat a bit more about geopolitical situation or whatever else. So we'll try and sort that out. Anyway, here's the Shostakovich.
I also think it's important to play Shostakovich. I think it's for a lot of the same. I mean, this is my musicologist hat, but we have to understand who Shostakovich was to understand why it's important to play Shostakovich, and it's important to know his life and history and what he stood for at the time, and the way he understood it in his contemporary brain. That he was fighting fascism and he was very much a victim of fascism, and that is relevant to now. And I think this is the thing that I'll say I lose the thread often again as like somebody who doesn't live in classical capital C classical world a lot. But I forget that there is a very real world now relevance to these composers, and that a lot of the time, because I live in more new music world, I think, do we need to play Shostakovich? We've heard so much Shostakovich. Do I need to listen to Beethoven again? Do I need to listen to Tchaik? We do. We absolutely do
Those
need
are
to
the
listen
canon.
to it.
Those symphonies and chamber music are the canon of this industry. And so when folks say we're going to give Beethoven a break, well, that's much of the canon. We can't do that. But we can make room for those that are living and writing music. I'm so glad you mentioned it, Jacob. I have a very talented friend, Evan Fine, in New York City, who has written me a concerto sonata. And all we can do is add to the repertoire, give the airings. We can air out pieces from underrepresented groups. I think about Sir Joseph Boulogne, who was the son of a Senegalese slave, Guadeloupe plantation. And he ended up sharing a roof with Mozart one summer and was a probable lover of Marie Antoinette and was wealthy and good looking and the best swordsman in Europe. And after he passed, for 150 years, nobody knew his name. Nobody played his music. And I'm not saying he's going to be on every last program, but pair him with Mozart. Look at the context there. There was a record that came out recently of the Clara Schumann Piano Concerto alongside Roberts. And again, maybe the Clara Schumann Concerto is not as profound, but it doesn't need to be. 6 she wrote it. She was clearly a badass. She was a mother of 7. She was touring. She was advising Brahms on his music, and she had a syphilitic, unwell husband. I mean, she was doing it, you know?
And I mean, I think this is an important point. I mean, you know, if you look at like women composers as a good example, you know, the world has kind of, until very recently, probably forgotten a lot of them, as you say, like Clara Schumann. I mean, you know, some fantastic movie, and there's a whole load of people going back to the very earliest music. You know, Hildegard von, I can't remember her
Von
name.
Bingen, yes.
Bingham. Yeah, I mean, you know, right back to that. You know, yet we've kind of, you know, gone back, and you know, we obviously the number of fantastic gay composers that have been there that have all been, you know, shut off and this, and it was only in the 40s that anybody started to understand this, and of course it's still a problem today, and we see this, it's a continual, and so I'm getting on my soapbox here, sorry. I mean, I think we need to tell the stories of these people. That's the thing, it's the music and the story of them, I think, is important.
Well, you shine a spotlight on them, and you let the audiences and the orchestras make the decision if they're liked. I don't love every last opus number of Mozart's. There are 626 published. Of course, a lot of it is genius, and you can't even comprehend the gifts that this guy had. But you know, his batting average wasn't 1,000. But a funny story about Hildegard von Bingen. I was in an early music class, undergrad, and gosh, just a little off color, but whatever. And I had this wonderful professor who happened to be lesbian, and Hildegard von Bingen is the first to depict in writing the female orgasm. And so I quoted her quote on this particular wondrous activity, and suffice it to say, I had a great mark on
That sounds good. I mean, one thing I noticed in your biography was that you do a lot of outreach activities. I mean, you said you've been to schools. You know, you do things with the LGBT community. You get out there and do things. I mean, do you find that your position as a well-known musician has helped that?
It's funny you bring that up. In my earliest days of performing, I had somebody on my team who said to me, "If you come out, you will never get hired again." Well, you know, with my personality and being a Gemini and being outgoing, I thought, well, I have to now, and I had more work than ever when I did that. But for a time, I was the only out classical violinist on the circuit.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that as a point of pride. I'm saying that as it was unique. And now folks come out on their own time. It's their journey. It's my journey, and someone else is theirs. But for a few years, I don't think there was out talking out magazine and you know going on Sirius XM, the Derek and Romaine show, and Pride events. I'm the first classical musician to play at a U.S. Pride event, and again, I wasn't doing it to be the first or to have notoriety. I'm doing it so that some kid coming up can do. And now there are a lot more open, and we're only talking the last. But 15 years ago, even artists who were talked about as probably gay and probably having these partners, they weren't sharing it. Why not? Share it. Again, but mind you.
Yeah, although I think it is, I mean, I think that we're going to get back to geopolitics here. I think that it is getting harder at the moment, certainly in parts of the world, for people to actually come out in a way. You know, obviously in certain countries it's impossible. But even in, you know, Western Europe, the UK and America, you know, it's not as easy at the moment. You know, there is this great negativity around the LGBT community, and we're back at the fascism again in Shostakovich. It's you can never rest against it, unfortunately.
And I wonder on the plus side how many engagements I did end up having with LGBT conductors, presenters, and then on the other side how many I lost. I think of one engagement that was dangled in front of me for a country that is vehemently
Yeah.
anti-gay, and my partner said, "Go. It's just not worth it." It's exactly right about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And I mean, I think that actually, my view is that we should, I mean, we have to support people in that environment, and actually going there and giving legitimacy to a regime that actually puts people in prison, kills them, and all this kind of thing. I don't see. I could never do that, and I think it's anyway. Geopolitics. We're going to go off on that one.
And
Apologies, Jacob. Get us back onto music. No, sorry, Karen.
I don't think that somebody's sexual most important thing about. We all have so much that we offer, but if I'm sitting down with somebody to about my life, I can't neglect my partner. I can't neglect, going to clubs on weekends. Just have to be authentic to you, and that doesn't impact my musical playing performance. But if I can play these Brahms Hungarian Pride events, if I can play Chopin Nocturne on an LGBT radio station, well, there's a different audience there, first of all. And guess what? They probably go to the ballet, opera, and musical theater, especially musical theater, And you just have to represent the community the best way you can when talking about yourself and talking about you love. I don't think it makes me play Tchaikovsky or Saint-Saëns, and these gay composers differently, but I was proud to play the Barber Concerto and Tchaikovsky Concerto, and Tchaikovsky probably committed suicide when he took that drink at the age of 53 to cover a scandal that was beginning. Maybe we would have had 5 more symphonies. Maybe we would have had 5 more concertos, but we don't know.
I mean, I occasionally get interviewed in my own job and this kind of thing, and it always seems as if the first question people ask is about me being trans. They never, and I keep trying to say to them that the least interesting thing about me is that I'm trans. I have other things in my life which are much more interested in that. This is just who I am. But people seem kind of fascinated, obsessed, I don't know the word, with trying to understand sexuality and gender and these kinds of things, and it kind of sometimes gets in the way of people, I think, making connections in a way. The people
Tell
are
them we all bleed the same way. We all have tears. We all have laughter. We all get older.
Yeah.
We all need human interaction. The second people realize that we all have to get along with our neighbors and our friends and our colleagues, the world's and to accept differences. It's wonderful when you go to a bar or the gym sauna or an orchestra rehearsal, and you've got folks in the room who think like you, don't worship like you, aren't your generation, and might be immigrants. You might be the immigrant, and you leave as gentlemen. You leave shaking hands. You leave after a polite discussion. I think, why doesn't this happen in Washington, D.C.? We all just left as gentlemen. Can't we shake hands and agree to disagree?
Now, I do have to ask one more question about something that was on your biography, Dancing with the Stars. It said, come on, you have to explain this one because it was on there, Dancing with the Stars. We need to know.
Okay. I am a better violinist than I am dancer. I can let you know that unequivocally. No, I did Pittsburgh's Dancing with the Stars about a decade ago, and I had the most fun. It was nerve-wracking, and I can memorize a 30-minute concerto, but a 2.5-minute dance routine that had paso doble, it had tango. My wonderful partner, Sandra, who was patient and guided me through that, and she really wanted to win, and we didn't. I hate to say. But, we had the castanets, and we had Rihanna Diamonds, and live audience, and there I am, vest with no shirt underneath, and a spray tan, and a bright lime green scarf belt thingy, and tight pants. I loved it, and I hope that the ABC show would come calling one day. I would love that. But It was something that was a little frightening, but I ran towards it. I'm glad I did it. Just like anything else, it might be a little bit different. I think about George Crumb's Black Angels quartet that I did as a kid. And for those that don't know, you've got Japanese words in the score, you've got tuned wine glasses, you've got bass bows creating sounds, and you look at it, it looks like hieroglyphics. You think, of course I know how to play the violin, and then you're looking at a George Crumb score with notes of different sizes and disappearing, and you're chanting while playing, and you think the left side of my brain can't even comprehend this. But then you finish and you think it's so much better on the other side.
Well, maybe what a fantastic way to wrap up with that sentiment that we are better on the other side. Run towards it. Experience the new and the weird. It's much more fun that way. Thank you very much for joining us today, Andrew. It's been such a lovely chat. And I sincerely hope when people in whatever city you happen to be in are near a concert of yours that they go see you.
And I hope to see you in Halifax, and hope to see you, Sam, in Sweden. 2 places I have not yet been to, but would love.
Come to Sweden. Give me a call, and we'll meet up, and we'll go and find somewhere to practice your dancing.
I love that. Let's do it.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thanks ever so.
So that's all for this episode. You've been listening to the Classical Queer Podcast, and Jake and I look forward to being with you next month. The incidental music is courtesy of Jared Miller, and the show was produced by Samantha Jane.